In this section, we will begin painting the scene. I like to start by blocking in the overlapping objects to compose and define the planes in the scene. I only need to get the general color down, then I can refine it later. The same goes for many of the shapes I'll be painting. I can blend, smudge, and augment the edges of shapes later to make them more intricate. Think of this as digital sculpting. I'm going to start with rough forms and gradually refine that into something with more detail. Since we will be using a lot of layers, I have created some ahead of time. This serves two purposes. First, by doing this before you start painting, you won't need to interrupt your flow as much. And second, it helps you visualize what you will be painting, along with the sequence that the layers will need to be stacked in order for the image to display correctly. For example, the sky needs to be the bottommost layer, and the foreground trees need to be above the background trees. Some areas get a little more tricky, for example, the overlapping land surrounding the stream. I've also tidied up the layers since there are so many by grouping them. We will be adding more layers than this, as well as merging some layers together. Eventually, we will end up with just a single layer, which is the finished painting. As you are painting, I recommend using the Save As command found in my shortcuts to save iterations of your work. This way, if something happens that you are unhappy with, you can go back to an earlier save rather than starting over. I will be following this rule as well, and though I will try to mention when I'm saving, I want you to keep track of saving on your end. You can do it every few chapters, or you can do it after completing a substantial amount of progress. Just remember to save whether you see me doing it or not. Let's save this wonderful blank canvas in Painter Riff format. And enough talking about painting, let's actually put something on the canvas. We'll start with the sky. The sky in this painting couldn't be easier. All I need to do is fill the sky layer with a sky blue. In my HSI color gamut, I'll choose the most saturated blue, and then use the value slider to make the color a lot brighter. Let's say around 215. I'll choose the fill shortcut, and then I can use the universal color picker to further refine the color once I see it on my canvas. Next, I will use an extra large digital airbrush to create a simple gradient in the sky. While following along with the course, you can use the brush sizes panel, which will give you quick access to some commonly used brush sizes. These correspond to the sizes I will choose throughout this course. I'll make a note of the value of the current sky color I have applied. In this case, it's 215. I'll click on the most saturated indigo color in the HSI gamut and enter 215 into the value slider. This retains the saturation and hue of the color I selected and matches the value of the sky color. I'll make the color a bit lighter, and now I will paint with the digital airbrush from the horizon upward using overlapping horizontal strokes that fade from heavy pressure to light pressure. This makes the sky appear hazy in the distance. Next, I'll select the most saturated yellow from the HSI gamut and make it an almost white. Again, I'll fade the color upward starting from the horizon. Try not to go far above the tree line sketch. Next, I'll select a darker blue that is shifted more toward indigo, and I'll choose a very large brush. Using the bottom edge of the brush, I'll paint a gradient that fades from the top of the sky downward. To create a vignette effect, make the top corners the darkest. Leave the middle of the sky untouched. Although we may tweak it later, that's about it for the sky. Next, I will go to the land mid group and select the distant land layer. I will use the rectangular selection tool to create a straight horizon and fill it with an almost white version of the same blue color I used for the top of the sky. Deselect and ensure the horizon is overlapped by the foreground land according to the sketch. This land is covered by snow, so it should be noticeably lighter than the sky. In order to give the illusion of distance to your painting, you'll need to pay careful attention to the value of your colors. Generally speaking, objects that are farther away from the observer in the painting appear lighter compared to identical colors in the foreground. This effect is most pronounced in the shadow areas. Distant colors may also be less saturated and shifted in hue, but we'll come back to that. In the case of the sky and snow, the sky is obviously farther away, but the sky is blue and the snow is white. The snow is also closer to the foreground, yet the evergreens behind it are darker. So this principle of shifting the color value mostly applies to objects that are similar to each other. For example, you can see in my reference painting that the distant trees get darker or lighter as they move toward or away from us. The snow gets lighter or darker as well. Shifting the color value can also apply globally to the entire painting. In the case of the deepest shadows in my painting, they are the darkest in the foreground and lightest in the background. But there are exceptions to that too, as you can see if you compare the shadows in the water to those on the tree trunks. The more contrast or difference between the shadows, the farther away the objects will appear from each other. There are also reflections, light sources, cast shadows, and other effects that may affect the value of the color in their own way. For example, the sky is light reflected off of the atmosphere. It is so far from the land that it has its own illusion of distance, which we have defined using a gradient. If you want to get better at judging how light or dark something should be, just observe nature in real life and make mental notes. This is the best way to burn those principles into your brain. Although it's not as effective emotionally, you can also study photographs of nature. It can be difficult to gauge the value of a color simply by looking at it. A helpful technique for evaluating the value structure of any painting or reference image is to view it in grayscale. I'll link you to a video you can watch that will teach you how to set this up, but in Windows 10 or 11, I can simply press a keyboard shortcut to make all of my displays temporarily grayscale. I have added this shortcut to my Stream Deck, so I can just press a single button to enable and disable grayscale preview. We'll be checking the color values a lot throughout this course, but there is another method that may be preferable if you don't have the same hardware and software setup as I do. You can make the Navigator grayscale using the shortcut in my workspace. This will allow you to see your artwork in color and grayscale simultaneously. So with this principle of shifting the value in mind, I'll shift the values appropriately as I block each layer in. I'll have an opportunity to adjust the colors later if needed. I'll select the Land FG Right group and the Land FG Right layer. I'll use the Lasso Selection tool and make horizontal zigzag strokes to select most of the foreground land, except for what is near the horizon. This will be the land that frost-covered grass will sit upon. The Lasso Selection tool makes short work of filling in these types of irregular shapes. If you have difficulty using the Lasso Selection tool, you can try the Polygonal Lasso, which will give you more control, but the shapes may look more angular. Holding Control will temporarily toggle to the freeform lasso and vice versa. But you can also use just about any brush to fill this stuff in, so long as it's completely opaque, meaning you cannot see through the paint. The Smooth Fill and Smooth Scratch board are excellent examples. I'll select the red hue angle that is around 93, and I'll choose the saturation that is 61. I'll make the color brighter, about 1/4 of the way down the slider. I'll fill the selection with that to create a base color that we will add detail to later. Deselect, and this should appear darker in value compared to the snow. Let's move to the Land FG Left group and fill in the Land FG Left layer using the same lasso selection method. I'll select well below the grass blades sticking up because I will paint those in separately. The bottom edge where the land meets the water is what I'm most concerned about getting right. I'll fill that selection with a lighter version of the land color. It should be lighter than the land on the right, but darker than the snow in the distance. I'll deselect whenever I'm finished with a selection. I'll hide the shading layer of the sketch, but you can show it anytime you think it might be useful. Now let's fill in the stream in the Land FG Right group. I'll choose a desaturated indigo color from the HSI gamut and use the lasso to make a selection. I want the top edge to match the sketch, but the lower right side will be covered by grass, so it doesn't need to be exact. Imagine what the shape of the land would be without any grass covering it. That's what I'm going for here. The stream should appear much darker relative to the other values in the scene. Near the horizon, there will be some small hills of varied elevations. I'll start with the tallest one. This can be found on the Hills BG layer in the Land Mid group. While the last few layers had rough edges, this time we want a smooth, rounded edge. This can be difficult to accomplish with the lasso, so let's use the Smooth Fill brush. As for the color, much of the hill will be covered in deep shadows. These won't be anywhere near black, but they do need to be noticeably darker than the color we laid down for the stream. By starting with the stream color, I can simply lower the value slider a bit to get the correct color. As you move the slider, keep an eye on the color swatch in the color panel, because it will show you a side-by-side comparison of the colors so you can see the difference. Don't expect to get the color right the first, the second, or even the fifth time. It's normal to try colors and then adjust them if they don't look correct. You can use the temporary layer called color testing to try colors on the canvas without any worry that it will ruin your painting. Feel free to move this layer above and below other layers if needed. And if you aren't using it, you can hide it. Now I'm ready to fill in the hill. You may want to zoom in so you can follow the sketch more carefully. I need not worry about painting near the bottom. I just need to paint beyond the edge of the horizon and then make the top edge of the hill look nice. I'm using a small brush along the edge, but you can fill in the middle with a medium-sized brush. Now I'll zoom out and hide the sketch layer for a moment to check to see if I've done a good job of filling in the layer. Let's repeat the previous step for the remaining hill layers. This time I'll use the snow color, but I'll make it a tiny bit darker so that it stands out against the snow on the ground. I'll start with the hill's low front layer. I want the left side to wrap around the larger hill so they look stacked on top of one another. Again, don't worry about the bottom edge for now. Next, I'll fill in the remaining hill's low back layer using a color that is in between the previous color and the snow color on the ground. By sampling the colors and looking at the value, you can enter the correct value numerically. Zoom in closely and use a fine brush for this so that you are certain to paint slightly below the horizon line. Now to flatten off the bottoms of all these hills, I'll use the rectangular selection tool and press delete to clear the selected pixels. And repeat that process to trim the remaining hills. Be sure the hills overlap the horizon according to the sketch. Hide the sketch periodically to check your work. If you left any gaps in the paint, be sure to clean those up by painting with the same color on the appropriate layer. Next, we will add the impression of some very distant trees. This will be the background for more detailed trees that we will paint in front. I'll select the random chalk brush with the basic paper. Let's start with the tree line dark layer. And the color I will use is a slightly lighter version of the dark hill color I was using earlier. With the brush tool selected, you can sample that by holding Alt or by using the dropper tool. This brush will make what looks like distant clusters of foliage. The size of your brush will control how distant the leaves appear. The farther away the tree, the smaller the brush should be. I'm using a medium-sized brush to define the top edge, and then I can fill in the bottom edge with a larger brush. Use the sketch to guide you, but keep in mind that we will be adding more trees on top of this, so this layer just needs to fill in the background. The bottom edge should be filled in very well, and the top edge should feather out to give the illusion of treetops. Next, I'll add some lighter frost-covered trees in the distance. I'll continue using the indigo color I've been using for the dark colors, and just make it about 200 in value. I'll use the Select Layer Content shortcut to put a selection around the tree line dark layer, and then click on the Hide Selection shortcut. I'll select the tree line light layer, and paint on it with the random chalk brush at a medium size. Don't cover the whole tree line, skip some areas where there are different types of trees. And favor the left side so the right side of the trees appear in shadow. This will help the trees look like they have some volume rather than appearing flat. Don't go overboard on the details here. Detail is another tool you can use to give the illusion of distance. Add less detail in the background and more detail in the foreground. When you're finished, deselect the active hidden selection. If you get stuck during this course, it's probably going to be because you had a selection active but hidden. Be sure to deselect anytime we are through with a selection. Let's continue blocking in layers by jumping over to the Trees FG layers in the Land FG group. These trees are going to require several passes of detail before they will be complete. Let's just get the impression of the trunks and maybe a few of the more prominent branches. We can come back to the finer branches and frost later. The color I want is in the HSL gamut. I want an orange hue around 100 with a saturation and value of around 40. I want the trunks to look rough, so I will use a palette knife called Smooth Palette Knife AR. With a brush that is about the maximum width of the trunks, I'll zoom in, select the Trees FG right layer, and paint overlapping strokes while following the sketch to put in a cluster of 3 trees. Have the trunks fork on 2 of the trees. The trunk should be slightly wider at the bottom compared to the top, and flare the base of the trees outward. I'll use the eraser to remove a bit of the base of the trunks to make them look like they're sunken in the snow. You may want to hide the sketch to clean up the trunk shapes. Now let's put in some of the thicker branches using the smooth palette knife with that same dark brown color and a fine brush diameter. Zoom in and vary your pen pressure to make the branches wider at the base and thinner at the tips. You can create single strokes to establish the branch shape, length, and direction, then go over the branches with overlapping strokes to fill them in opaquely. My sketch gets very loose here, so you don't have to follow it exactly. What's important is to just give some structure to the tree and don't go all the way to the edge of the branch boundaries that have been defined in the sketch. If it's helpful, you can alternate between starting the branches from the trunk and starting them from the tips of the branches. And be sure to overlap some of the branches. The more work you put in here, the better your tree will look, so don't rush through this. I know it's tedious, but try to enjoy painting the branches. Believe it or not, this is the easy part, and we will put in the smaller branches using a faster technique. If you have multi-touch, you can easily rotate your page to make it more comfortable to draw at difficult angles. Even if you don't have multi-touch, you can use the rotate page tool to do this as well. If you get bored or fatigued, save a copy of your work, take a break, and return to the painting later. After you've laid in the branches, hide your sketch and check your work. Make sure the branches are filled in enough to where they stand out against the sky. Now you'll have to do this again for the second grouping of trees on the left. If you decide you want to leave that out, that's fine too. Keeping the trees separate is important because we will be adding more to them later. It may help you focus if you hide the first grouping of trees while painting the second. Although the second grouping of trees will be covered by a bush in front of it, put in the entire trunks anyway. And there is a third grouping of trees, but these are shorter and not as complex. Erase from the bottoms of the trunks or extend them so that the left tree is in the foreground and the other 2 are in the background, with the middle tree being the most distant. Work back and forth between the tree layers, erasing and painting as needed, until you're satisfied with your results. Now let's block in the bush on the left. Just like the tree line in the distance, I only want to establish the background, which I will paint on top of later. I'll continue using the dark brown I used for the trees, and reduce the hue, add a bit of saturation, and lighten the value. Then I'll use the random chalk brush with a medium diameter and 90% opacity to paint in the bush background. Stay away from the edge of the sketch near the top. I want to keep the bottom edge sharp, so I will clean it up with the eraser. Be sure the bush is filled in opaquely enough so that you cannot see through to the background. Next, I will enable Preserve Transparency, which will keep me from painting outside of the bush shape I painted. It works sort of like a stencil. You'll need to keep track of whether this is enabled or disabled because it affects all layers. I'll reset the random chalk brush. I'll sample some blue colors from the sky and snow and use a medium diameter brush to fade the bush from brown to blue, then to light blue. I'll disable Preserve Transparency. At the base of the foreground trees, I have a layer that will be used to separate the foreground and midground planes. On the snow base layer in the Land FG Left group, I will use the indigo shadow color from the distant tree line, along with the smooth fill brush, to paint a mound near the base of the trunks. Now that we have all of the primary objects blocked in, it would be wise to save a copy of the painting. In the next video, we will begin adding form and detail to each object in the painting. That's coming up next.